Welcome to another episode of No Power Panel. I'm Noam,
And I'm Isaac.
and we're very excited to be joined this week by a special guest for the panel, Mr. Yves Engler, who is a prominent Canadian activist and author, and is now running for the leadership of Canada's NDP. Thanks for joining us, Yves.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So in terms of just to get us started, um, you've said that you didn't initially want to run for the leadership when you were approached by the Socialist Caucus members. What kind of made you reverse that decision and decide that now was the time to jump into electoral politics?
Yeah, my initial reaction was was not on my radar whatsoever. And when I was asked by the Socialist Caucus, or specifically Barry at the Socialist Caucus, I basically said, sort of thanks for asking, and no, but I left it, okay, maybe I'll get in touch with you in a bit and have a final decision. And then I didn't really get back in touch with him. And then he called back a few weeks later, and I said, I'll think about it a little bit more. And he pushed it again, and I agreed. And really, I mean, there's obviously the horrors that Israel's committing in Gaza and Canada's complicity in that. That is something that I've been, campaigning on aggressively, and I'm written about going back a long time, and I'm aware of the scope and the depth of Canada's role in enabling Israel's crimes. So that's obviously an important issue, but it's an issue where the NDP has moved into a better position, and they're actually challenging. It's restrained in their challenge, but they are actually challenging liberal policy on that. The other issue that kind of tipped me over into, okay, this is a really big issue and that I am well placed to deal with, was the militarism. And kind of as I was pondering running, it became clearer and clearer that Carney was going in a aggressive, you could argue a radical militarist turn, where there's a huge increase in immediate military spending, right? They're trying to figure out how to get $9 billion more out the door in the military before March, is the recent story I just saw. And they're committing to this like radical increase of potentially 5% via NATO. And so this, to me, and we're seeing it already play out, where increasingly this is coming at the expense of social programs, cutbacks in the federal workforce. And I think, to put it at a big picture level, for those of us who've watched these Canadian politicians enable Israel's Holocaust in Gaza and the horrors we're seeing there, what we're doing when we talk about increased military spending, the best case is we're just talking about cutbacks in social programs, diverting public resources from social programs to the military. In the worst case, we're talking about empowering the military capacities of these politicians that have been supporting this horrors we're seeing coming out of Gaza. And that the likely result of increased Canadian military spending is not just cut back on social programs, but is actually that military capacity will be used to further subjugate people globally. And so I'm basically, I think, particularly well placed to deal with the Canada's complicity in genocide in Gaza, and also the military. And the NDP, put it frankly, has enabled this growth of militarism. Heather McPherson, who's the lead establishment candidate, she's on the NATO Parliamentary Association. She's repeatedly gone out of her way to boast about how great the military, celebrate the military. And so they're not in a position to push back on the military increase. So that's what pushed me into running. Now, also another thing kind of connected to that is I'm of the opinion that the popular uprising against Canada's complicity in genocide, it has been unique. There's never been in the history of Canadian foreign policy this much activism for 22 months on Canada's complicity in international crime. But I would say, and I actually include myself in the critique of this, the left has not actually done a very good job of taking that energy and politicizing it in a more broad level. There's lots of people who are outraged, appalled what Canada's doing in Gaza, but they aren't sort of saying, hey, this is all tied to a broader Canadian foreign policy and, quite frankly, a broader capitalist system and imperial system that is, deeply unjust, that is anti-ecological, obviously anti-indigenous, a war against working people, etc. And so I see this NDP leadership race partly as part of an effort to take people who've been kind of focused on the Palestine issue and broaden into a more systemic challenge. And I including myself, right? Like I have spent the last 20 months mostly talking about Palestine, Canada, Palestine, a bit about militarism. But even as I get the campaign going, I'm going back to lots of issues I've been talking about over the past 25 years, but I've not been talking about that much recently because what's happening in Gaza is so horrible. And the idea is, you want to just stop that. So I'm hoping that this leadership race will open up some space for a kind of deeper politicization of those who've been outraged by Canada's complicity in genocide.
So, yeah, in terms of, to that point, in terms of your hopes for this leadership race, and wanting to shift the conversation and move, kind of get more people actively engaged in these topics, is some critics may argue that your presence in this race isn't necessarily to win, but is to more just further that dialogue, be that voice in the race, bring those people into the fold. Do you think that's a fair analysis, or are you in it to win it and create that coalition that can actually, without the establishment support within the party that's currently exists?
Yeah, I was one of those critics you referred to. My initial thinking here was, okay, I'm going to join this. It's a long shot. I'm going to try to shift the debate to the left. And I would consider a success if you just sort of pull the debate into a more kind of honest assessment of global and national affairs. Obviously, the current discussion of global and national affairs is not connected to the reality of our world. Now, that my position on that has changed. I now actually believe I have a shot at winning here, and I've been quite honestly surprised by how many people want to volunteer. I've been surprised by how many people are I guess gravitate to talking about capitalism, saying that no, not just that we want to be socialist, but actually we oppose capitalism, that we believe in economic democracy. How many people have been, I wrote about degrowth. I know degrowth is considered, you don't refer to it as degrowth, you're going to alienate people. But so far I found that there's lots of people who understand that the ecological crisis is monumental. And if we can't have a discussion about degrowth in Canada, we have a big problem when we're one of the biggest consumers or emitters of greenhouse gases, but also of use of lands and destruction of fish and on and on and on. So I think there is a political moment. We see that with 600,000 people joining Jeremy Corbyn's new party in the UK. We see that with some of the left forces in Democratic primaries in the US, Sean Orr out in Vancouver. So I see that there's a lot of people who are looking at this world and they're seeing growing inequities in terms of billion and tens of billionaires, and then they're seeing most working people basically stagnating wages, and then they're also seeing the fact that there's a absolute crisis in unhoused people. And yet we have all this money to pump into the military. We talk about security, and there's a couple 100,000 people who have been driven out of their homes from forest fires. What's a greater security threat than that? While Mark Carney's talking about China or Russia or Iran as some sort of security threat. So I think that there's the conditions are there. Am I the best retail politician out there? No, I'm not the best retail politician out there. I don't know that I'm I'm not good at glad handing. I'm not inclined in some different ways. What I am is somebody who's been engaged with social movements for the past 25 years. I've not been involved in formal electoralist politics. The only way this is successful is if tens of thousands of new people join the NDP because they want to see a serious shift in the direction of the party, and more specifically, they want a politician who's not just going to cower to whatever seems to be expedient in whatever moment. And so, is it an easy victory? Of course not. Is it possible? I believe it is possible. Am I going to devote the energy, all my energy, to try to make that realistic or make it happen? Yes, I am. And there's more than 500 people who've already engaged in volunteer campaigning to assist that, and we're growing every day. And the race hasn't started. Will the NDP allow me to run? That's another question that is a big obstacle. And we think that there's no reason they shouldn't allow me to run. But there's lots of voices out there, particularly in the pro-genocide world, that are calling on the NDP to block me. But we'll see how that plays out.
So kind of parachuting off of that point, you talk about never having been involved in electoral politics before. Have you been a New Democrat? Like the party, I think it's fair to say absolutely drawing new people into the party is going to be key to you or whichever hopefully leftist candidate is able to make a success of turning the NDP back into a left-wing party again. But there are traditional members, I know, because I used to be a very involved establishment New Democrat, you could probably say at one point, who aren't going to be super open to somebody who hasn't been at least involved in the party in the past. Do you have a history with the party that at least will satisfy that kind of requirement from people?
I voted for the NDP in most of the elections that I've been able to vote for federally. I'm in Quebec, so I don't vote for the NDP in a
provincially. Yeah.
And I became a member in the early 2000s to vote in the leadership race. I became a member again in 2017. To vote for Nikki Ashton, who I thought was the most left wing of the candidates in 2017, and I became a member again in June.
Okay, perfect. So there is some of that there. That's good. Not that I care, but there are people out there who will. As you kind of talk about outlining some of your policies and we move into that kind of territory, do you see your goal to be very much to reset the party entirely, a kind of party takeover like what Naheed Nenshi has done in Alberta, like what kind of Jeremy Corbyn tried to do with the Labour Party or Bernie Sanders tried to do with the Democratic Party? Or do you think that there's enough left-wing policy already attached to the NDP that you're looking to just kind of put a different face on the existing policies that are mostly already there?
Yeah, I think we're talking about I don't know all of the policy book. I know that there have been lots of good policies passed at conventions over many years that have, for the most part, been kind of ignored by the leadership of the party. So I don't think the most NDP members, I truly believe that their values politically are closer to mine than they are to Heather McPherson, right? Heather, as I've pointed out a few times recently, Heather McPherson support the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I think most NDP members want to see the tar sands either phased out or shut down fairly quickly, like I do. McPherson is on the NATO Parliamentary Association. We know historically the NDP passed a resolution in support of withdrawing from NATO that was never actually voted against by membership, but just kind of thrown out the window by the leadership. Heather McPherson stood up for applauded a neo-Nazi in Parliament and never apologized for that, and happens to be very close to the Ukrainian Canadian Congress that is a big proponent of Yaroslav Hunka. And Heather McPherson spoke at the Trilateral Commission in 2022, which is sort of a CIA kind of talk shop. I'm of course not planning on having any association with the CIA associated organizations. And I would, of course, oppose Hunka and other sort of former SS individuals. McPherson is, continued. June 11th, she's meeting with doing an event with Erwin Kotler, who is the most important pro-Zionist activist in Canada over the past 50 years. And she's praised him in the past. I genuinely believe that my views on those are just some examples, are closer to the majority of NDP members, current members, let alone those further to the left that have kind of sort of rejected the party, than McPherson. And now, of course, people take into account questions of electability. They take into account questions of how the media will respond to a candidate and all kinds of things that are kind of associated with that. So I understand that lots of people who current NDP members whose values may be closer to mine than McPherson are going to still support McPherson because, well, this is the system we live in, and I understand that. That's a totally legitimate position. But I don't see. I think there are current members, people like Leah Gazan, like Alexandre Boris, even Don Davies, who I think in their views of political affairs are not that far removed from mine. They would say in an ideal circumstance, but we live in a certain system that makes these views sort of unacceptable in terms of translating that into official politics. So I think there are lots of people in the NDP, both at the top echelon within the members who are more or less aligned with my values, but yeah, I don't see how this doesn't include a pretty fundamental shakeup in the NDP kind of current hierarchy in terms of the backroom kind of players, and also the bigger point is that it would bring in a whole bunch new members and shift this party towards being more focused on how do we have electoral associations that are doing lots of events, that are attending lots of demonstrations, that are kind of part of the activist network in whatever community or city they're in. Like how many NDP electoral associations are going to all these Palestine demos? There's been thousands of these demos across the country, and there's almost no MPs that have shown up. But how many riding associations are even going? I don't think there's very much of that, in large part because the whole kind of ethos of the party is to focus on, what does the Globe and Mail say about us, or what does the CBC say about us, not, what is right and what is about like building a kind of alternative form of power to change, not just to win government, but to win policy change, or to win. I'd be happy to lose, but win by pushing positive policies, right? That gets into some of the dialectic with social movements. That's not a simple question, not a simple way to answer that, but that's kind of more of the way I'm seeing things.
So to that point, so we've seen kind of a lot of younger leftists who are involved in these movements reject the NDP recently, especially over the last couple of years. We saw it a lot in the Ontario NDP with how the NDP treated Sarah Jama in Hamilton. And there's been kind of this exodus of like activists and activism that was within the NDP. And as you said, it's kind of like it's non-existent within riding associations right now. And I guess my question for you is, how do you plan on changing that? And what do you plan on doing to engage these people, and a lot of them young people, but it's across the demographic spectrum, to bring them back? They might be completely rejecting electoral politics right now. They don't have any faith in the future of the NDP or like electoral politics in general. How do you plan to engage with those potential voters?
Well, the first thing is, I think, to put out ideas that are attractive to people who are kind of feel disconnected from the party. First of all, put out ideas. Secondly, like speaking tours and actually being engaged and being willing to speak in all the different forums and sort of just, I guess, the energy on a personal level to activate that stuff. Ultimately, I think it has to be about a shift in the actual decision-making structure of the party, and have less of that power in the hands of the leader, and more of it conventions and other forms of policy-making platforms. So that's not, it's not an easy thing to do from one day to the next. The first thing, you have to start by stating that as the aim, and then working to actually implement that. And so I totally understand people who are like, oh, well, the NDP's betrayed me so many times, I'm not going to engage with this leadership race that Yves is participating in. I totally get that, and for those who are doing good work and mobilizing on the environment or Palestine or other issues, I hear you, and don't waste your time necessarily on this campaign. I'm totally that works. But I do think there's power in having a political party that actually has representation. And people said, okay, well, let's why don't you just set up another party, a more left-wing party? And I was in Oslo about, I guess now about 2.5 months ago. I spoke at an event that was organized by this new party that had been set up because the further left party in parliament had basically agreed with the NATO proxy war and had kind of basically become sort of supportive of NATO. And so some faction of that party set up this new party. And Norway has quite elaborate proportional representation system, and their aim was still just to gain 1 or 2 seats in parliament. And Canada, without that kind of proportional representation, it's just not realistic to establish a new party that has ability to have a position in parliament that in that kind of context. So I think that in that sense, the NDP, I mean, obviously the Greens exist as well, but the NDP has representation. It has a certain kind of platform, and so establishing a new party that was further to the left is not a realistic strategy, certainly in the medium term. So yeah, I mean, I'm sympathetic to people like that. I think that we do need a complete shift in the electoral arena. I think that our biggest democratic deficiency in society is the lack of economic democracy. But within that, the political system as it is not, needs to be completely reformed in terms of proportional representation and to become more democratic. And also within the NDP structure, that is necessary as well, where there's a need for a structure within the party that's more responsive to electoral associations than it is to the dictates of Jagmeet Singh or whoever's in that position.
So you've talked a lot about economic democracy. You just mentioned it now. It seems to be kind of one of the key policy areas that you're focusing on in your campaign, obviously alongside foreign policy issues and defense things. Can you just kind of briefly define what you mean by that and how you see a transition to a real economic democratic system working?
Yeah, I mean, basically, capitalism is based upon $1, one vote, and economic democracy is based upon one person, one vote. Now, how that plays out in a medium term, or how do you get to an equally controlled economy is obviously not easy. But I think you do that by expanding the power of unions. I just saw a statistic said that in the private sector right now, Canada has a lower unionization rate than before 1940. So before the RAND formula, or the formal union dues process that sort of legalized unions in the current form, the unionization rate was higher in the private sector. So we need to greatly strengthen the legislation that allows people to unionize and have greater say in their conditions of their work and their wages and the like. But we also got to go much beyond that in terms of having works councils where people actually formally have a say. Employees formally have a say in companies, and this, in Germany that exists. Even within capitalist countries, there's degrees to which that exists. Additionally, we need to be nationalizing industries, and again, in our current existing social democratic world, there's countries in Europe that have a greater role of state ownership in the economy and the like. But and so there's also, we, as part of the expanding social entitlements, expanding access to daycare, access to housing, co-op housing. We should never stop putting money into, at a federal level, into building public housing. That's part of the reason for our housing crisis. But we have to, you can't call yourself a democracy when you have people who have billions and tens of billions and other people who are making 15, 16 bucks an hour. And that's the power of billionaires, the power of the capitalist class has to be a challenge. Now, they have a lot of power, so you can't, they can make economic life horrible for people. And they've shown that in many cases when their power is challenged, that they will act often in quite drastic ways that have quite destabilizing impacts on people's lives. So if I was in government tomorrow, you certainly wouldn't have anything close to economic democracy. Even 5-10 years in, you would try reforms that move us in that direction, and that try to empower working people, empower the working class as you advance reforms that expand social entitlements, to expand workers' say within firms, expand the co-op sector of the economy, nationalize some areas, but you have to start off with a kind of big picture critique of capitalism, and I think that from a equity standpoint, it's clearly capitalism is it's just wrong to have billionaires and people who have a very little. That's just morally wrong. It's politically dangerous as well, morally wrong. But beyond that, it's the capitalism's profit maximization and its desire for endless growth is simply incompatible with ecological sustainability. It is, and Canada overshot March 26th is the day Canada overshot its use of natural resources and the planet's ability to regenerate those resources. That's before 3 months are done in the year. Globally, I believe the date is July 26. So we are moving towards ecological disaster, not just with the climate, but on a whole series of different fronts. And so and I also believe beyond the ecological, I also believe capitalism is a threat to our mental health. I mean, the advertising push for if you consume this, you're going to feel good at this age, and then at that age, it's something different, maybe completely different than what they were telling you 6 months earlier or 6 years earlier. It's a war on our psyche as well. It's need for constant expansion. It's need for constant selling. It leads to a breakdown of personal and social kind of health and norms. So there's a need to discuss this not just in a narrow sense, but in a big picture sense. And I believe there's a lot of people, there's not a lot of areas where we're talking about capitalism, but there's a lot of people who sort of, I don't know, in their bones, if you like, understand that there's obviously when it comes to the billionaires, it's just flagrant. When it comes to ecological disaster, it's pretty flagrant. And when it comes to feeling this sense of being destabilized by these sort of corporate forces, it's also fairly obvious. How do you bring that together in terms of saying, hey, well, let's name it? There really, this is, it's not all exactly the same. I don't want to be too simplistic about this, but there is some fundamental parts of this, and it's about corporate power. It's about billionaires. It's about an economic system that says that some individual can have control over 10,000 people's labor, and those 10,000 people's labor is being conducted in a social way. They are working socially, but all the benefits and all the decisions, at the big level at least, are in the hands of somebody who just happens to have a piece of paper that says they are the owner, they are the capitalist boss. So that all needs to be discussed. I think that most of the reforms in the direction of economic democracy are not at all complicated. They're reforms that exist within different countries. They're reforms and policies maybe even existed in Canada at a different period. Now, the end goal of moving all the way towards replacing capitalism, obviously that's something a bit more complicated. But most of the reforms in that direction aren't actually that complicated.
I guess I just have one follow-up question on that point. So speaking of, climate, and you've called for a just transition in the past. That's not just about green energy, but about decolonization and redistribution. Can you walk us through, just because we only have a little bit of time left, what that actually looks like for you in practice? Any specific changes you would like to see along those lines?
Yeah, well, right away, Bill C-5 needs to be thrown out. This notion that Carney uses the U.S.'s Trump's threats to basically then undercut indigenous rights and try to ram through more pipelines or other extractivist capitalist projects is just a step in the wrong direction. We need to the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People needs to be expanded into further jurisdictions, all different provinces, municipalities, right down into universities and other institutions should be upholding a sort of that kind of framework. So I think that land back. How does land back play itself out? And it plays itself out in all kinds of different forms. I think you can even have urban land back that takes. I've suggested this recently about land that's devoted to the public land that's devoted to the private automobile should be turned into public housing. And I've given some examples. I've written about this a few places over the years. But included in that should be indigenous-run co-ops housing for that's run by indigenous people within Montreal, right? That's like when you think of land back, you tend to think of it in outside of the urban centers, but there's even a role for that in urban centers. And so basically you need to recognize that that colonialism is not just in the past. And when we talk about reconciliation, first thing is to stop going further down the colonial process. And I see Bill C-5 as that, is just, going further down the colonial process. And not just that, also what we're seeing here in Quebec with Bill 97 around forestry and undercutting Indigenous rights, and also C-5 in Ontario as well is going in that direction too. So that's part of it, and I think that a lot of this can be done. It's obviously merging decolonization with ecological sustainability is part of what's necessary, and Indigenous people have clearly been at the forefront in pushing back against the extractive economy and that which pipelines and stuff that just contribute to further. Obviously, there are capitalist interests that are working very hard to kind of peel off different First Nations to join in on the ecologically destructive kind of initiatives, and understandably, there's lots of First Nations that sort of see, well, if we better off getting a piece of the pie than to just be excluded if this is the only option. And we've seen that with like Fort Chipewyan in the tar sands, and you can understand why communities would who've been resisting the tar sands for so many years would shift in direction if there's no real challenge to the tar sands kind of juggernaut. But I think that's kind of some of my thinking. And it's about listening to Indigenous leaders who are fleshing out ideas about exactly what land back means, about turning Crown land, giving jurisdiction to Indigenous communities, and as part of a project of pushing back against the ecological crisis that we're seeing.
Awesome. So then my just final question before we move into winners and losers is has anyone from the current NDP leadership structure reached out to you at this point, either supportively or critically, as you move into the race really kind of starting in the next couple of weeks?
No one has. No one's come out. No one's reached out. I have no one from the party structure. No.
Okay, perfect. Just wondering where that was at in terms of stuff.
We have. I should say that we have like a pretty. Like I said, 500 volunteers already signed up and active. But we have all these different committees, 7 or 8 different committees working on policy, comms, finance, et cetera, including in that is the figuring out all the rules, and the rules are not straightforward. They're not. We don't even know the rules of the race yet. There's going to be a policy book coming on August 20th that is going to give further detail on the signature sign up and the like. So we know some of the rules with regards to the fundraising and stuff, but there's still a whole lot that's not completely clear in how this race is going to exactly play out.
Sounds good. And just to confirm, no matter what the rules are, you're 100% in, you're staying in to the end. You're running to win.
I'll go one step further than that. If they, for some immoral reason, block my candidacy, we're going to continue and we're going to challenge it legally. We already have legal counsel set up. That's one of the committees to challenge the rules. So we'll do whatever we can legally. We'll also, of course, challenge it in the media domain, and we will challenge it and keep campaigning and keep building with the expectation that we're going to be there in March in Winnipeg, and so yes, we are definitely in it for the long haul.
Perfect. That's good to hear. All right, well, we're gonna move into winners and losers, and I'm just gonna take care of a little bit of podcast housekeeping business at this point and say that we're now posting winners and losers as its own segment, in addition to it being in the full episode. So starting this week, actually, it'll be going up on Friday mornings with the full episodes dropping on Saturday mornings. So continue to check us out there and subscribe to get the winners and losers videos. All right, moving on from that. How this week is going to work is I'll give a winner, then we're going to ask Yves who his winner is for the week, and then Isaac is going to give his loser, and then we'll have Yves give his loser. This will be how it works when we have a guest joining us. So my winner for the week is going to be Elizabeth Warren. I don't necessarily love everything about her, and I don't agree with her on some areas, but I think that she, in endorsing Zoran Mamdani this week and very publicly campaigning with him, did a couple of things. She redeemed herself in the eyes of a lot of leftists in the States who she lost with the very public feud with Bernie in 2020. I think that there's a lot of leftists who, just on this basis alone, whether it's justified or not, have forgiven her for that in seeing how much she's now pulling for him. And she also embarrassed Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand and Cory Booker, which I'm always down to see those three people being embarrassed, because they're all agents of chaos and evil forces in the States. And so anytime anybody manages to embarrass them, that makes them a winner in my book. She did that because they're closer to New York City than she is, and yet she's the one who's there campaigning with the Democratic nominee while they're all still refusing to endorse him. So that puts her in my winner spot for this week, at least. Yves, who is going to be your winner for the week?
Well, my winner for the week would be in the Victoria Moboko in the sports realm, the young 18-year-old of, I believe, Congolese descent, who's doing well in the Montreal tennis tournament. As much as tennis is this elitist sport, but in the political realm, I'd say my winner for the week is I think it's one person, and it's many people, but those who did this important report on Canadian arms continuing to be sold to Israel. I know that Rachel Small of World Beyond War is a central player in that. I know there are many others who participated. They clearly did a wonderful job, both at the research level and showing tracking the shipments, but also at the release and the whole kind of media side of it, and really doing an amazing job of kind of forcing the corporate media and the dominant media to cover this. And it certainly contributed to Carney recognizing Palestine. We'll leave aside exactly what that means. There's lots to be said there, but it's had an important impact on the discussion of Canada's complicity in the genocide in Gaza, and those who did that work. And I know it's many people, many different behind the scenes people, but they definitely deserve a whole lot of kudos for that great work.
Definitely. Very, very good choice for winner.
Okay, and then I'll give my loser this week. It's all the Republican lawmakers who have decided, they're from Iowa, Minnesota, North Dakota, Michigan, that they're calling for an investigation of Canada's wildfire management practices and potential remedies under international law. And they're also going to file a formal complaint against Canada to the US EPA and the International Joint Commission. These are lawmakers who have never taken the climate crisis seriously. Majority of them are Republican lawmakers who don't actually care about the root causes of these wildfires, what has made them so much more intense. You know, Canada's practice for combating wildfires has been pretty static for the past decades. That hasn't changed. What has changed is the conditions that have led to the extreme nature of them, and the fact that they're going around making a stink, claiming that we're making it so that they can't breathe clean air. I say in quotations as like a country, because they're just saying Canada. We're going to take Canada to the. It reminds me of that South Park "Blame Canada" song, but it just like is completely hypocritical to me. So they're my losers this week.
I was sticking to the double thing. Eugenie Bouchard, who left, who retired at the end of this tournament in Montreal. This is somebody who she doesn't speak French to the audience, and much worse than that, even she says she's from Westmount. She's not from Montreal. As to me, that I've 15 years, I've just been astounded by this tennis player's elitist notion of saying she's from Westmount and not from Montreal. Who would ever say that except for, I guess, a Westmounter? Westmount, of course, being the wealthiest jurisdiction in Quebec. Now, in the loser, I guess I'd go with Mark Carney in terms of, he's just the story coming out that he's with he supported the Golden Dome, the Trump's plan. So here we have elbows up, we're going to resist. And he has just conceded to Donald Trump on so many different fronts, from border quote unquote security that's hostile to refugees, to continuing on with the deployments with the U.S. military, to cutting the tax on the big U.S. Tech companies. And so it's just, and then, even failing in the sort of narrow of what he said he was going to do, of getting an accord with Trump. So Mark Carney he was, I guess, effective, unfortunately, in his rhetoric around standing up to the U.S., but has absolutely just conceded on behalf of Canadian militarists, on behalf of the corporate sector that supports the U.S. And I guess I would give Mark Carney the loser of the week.
All right, perfect. Thanks very much, and thanks for joining us, Yves. It's been great chatting with you, and maybe we'll have you back as the race gets going further.
That'd be great. Thanks for doing this.
Definitely, absolutely. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week, everyone, and we'll see everyone next week.